Yo, what up guys, it's Flark. And I'm back. And DK's probably back too. There's a lot of great changes coming in 9.2. I don't know what you guys have been doing this season, whether it's lamenting your forsaken dreams for the PvP talent rework for DK, or it's watching my stream and going, wow, I had no idea this guy was such a loser. Why does he get so mad at the video game? Either way, it was not having fun with competitive play on a DK class. I can guarantee you that's not what you were doing. But you might be able to coming up soon. The 9.2 changes are very powerful and properly focused. And I'll get to that in a second. But right now, DK is powerful. It just doesn't fit into the power level of all the other meta classes, as I made point of in my last video. So it's good to keep that in mind because, you know, we were very excited about 9.1. And I don't want this to look like another false hope kind of thing. We were excited about 9.1. It's harder to predict a PvP talent rework than it is to predict some tuning passes, which I'll get to again in a second. But even then, when we were excited about it, they actually nerfed some of those PvP talents. I think they overheard how much joy I felt toward the DK class PvP talent rework since I've been waiting for one of those for a long time. And they're like, absolutely not, we cannot do this, and they nerfed it all. Obviously, I'm being sarcastic. I feel like they thought that was the right idea. It turns out it's not the right idea, and they probably could have gone and unnerfed absolutely all of those PvP talents. And DK actually would be in a better spot because, like I said, it's powerful, but not nearly the power level that requires a class to be in a meta this insane. But anyway, none of that matters because now we're talking about 9.2. I just didn't want you to think that this was another case of false hope because I think this one's going to look really good. But anyway, I actually have these pulled up right here. These are some of the changes for DK right now. And there's not a lot, but they're extremely impactful, the ones that they were, and I'll tell you why. One of the problems with DK was that it was kind of underwhelming in its scaling, not from secondary stats or any other ability coefficients or a misuse of that word like a lot of people tend to, but because as the borrowed power systems get higher in effectiveness, i.e. higher item level conduits, DK didn't get a lot of value from that because its conduits were pretty bad. Its double legendary was pretty bad. Its Covenant choices were all really bad, except for Necrolord. So we had problems there as we chunked all these borrowed power systems into 9.2 and, you know, hyper-amplified them with all these higher item level conduits and the double legendary system. DK wasn't going to get a lot out of that. Now it does. So let's take a look at this together. These are very good focused buffs to address that exact problem. So first of all, we have the conduit changes. These are big. They're mostly for Unholy. Even Brutal Grasp is more for Unholy because Abomination Limb does more damage for Unholy than it does for Frost because of Mastery, Unholy's Mastery. Although it's not much because Frost has more strength modifiers, which actually allows the A-Bomb Limb to do a lot of damage in Frost Burst as well, as long as you build up that pillar and get as much strength as possible. But again, mostly for Unholy, and these are very, very good. You can see they're just buffing the conduits, is doubling the effectiveness of the reduction. Then it's increasing the damage of Festering Wound as well, which is just adding a ton of value to this conduit. That's incredible. Good synergy with Bursting Sores. Unholy already has tons of different builds it can run, both with PvE and PvP talent customization, but none of them are that impressive, so we don't care at all. When they are that impressive, Unholy is going to be one of the more fun things to theorycraft in the game, because there are so many viable PvE and PvP talents for Unholy, but it just doesn't feel like it right now because the whole class doesn't feel viable, but I assure you in 9.2 it will. This is another huge buff. Obviously we got the PvP specific hotfix for Death Coil, and now we're getting a Death Coil conduit buff, and again, Mastery and all this going up in the next season will just keep multiplicatively increasing the value of your spender now, which is really nice, especially again with the PvP specific buff that we have to Unholy. It's actually going to be even better to spend in PvP, which is nice. That's a huge change. And Eternal Hunger, I mean, I don't need to talk much about this. If you increase the value of a great conduit, it's going to get even better. But the Brutal Grasp one is important. because it's going to have synergy with all the other things they did this season for 9.2. And that's really exciting. They doubled the effectiveness of this conduit, as you can see, 30% from 15%, and that's going to scale up as your item level goes higher on the conduit, but that is massive. It's massive for Unholy because that's your burst window, and adding more damage to your burst window is huge, but also because they buffed the legendary. And the legendary has not just the effect of, increasing the damage taken, which is what they buffed, and that's going to be huge. I'll talk about it in a second. But also, it increases the duration by another 4 seconds, which means just more A-bomb limb damage overall. And I'm going to scroll to the bottom real quick here, if they have it here. They did, yes, it's actually at the top. They increased the damage of A-bomb limb by 20% baseline as well. This is the skill right here. It's not the conduit, not the legendary, but just the ability itself now does more damage. The conduit that makes the ability to do more damage increases it by more, and the legendary that makes it last longer is also buffed to make them take more damage from A-bomb limb damaged targets, which also buffs A-bomb limb more. So when you add these three things, these three changes, your A-bomb limb is going to be doing so much more damage for longer. So that is heavily increasing your burst window, both in like the amount of time you're pulling them in, which is very disruptive, but also in the amount of damage you're going to do in that burst window, and also the amount of damage that the ability that's pulling them in does in the first place. And I know people who've played Unholy knows during a burst window, A-bomb limb with a lot of mastery is your top damage just during that burst window. Of course, not a minute after, but during that window. So if you add all of these buffs together, that is going to be an enormous amount of damage to a very impactful ability, and that's huge, right? So now we will move on down to this legendary that I was talking about because I already spoiled it. This buff is also massive for both Frost and Unholy. See, the problem was when we have two legendaries, everybody else is going to get so much more value because their Covenant-specific legendaries were better, and they had more Covenant-specific legendaries to choose from because they had 2, 3, sometimes even 4 viable Covenants for that class. We had 1. So if that one Covenant legendary wasn't good, then we were going to lose so much value from this change. But doubling the effectiveness of it is really, really impactful. I mean, that is so much more on-demand damage for Obliterate. That's just so much more of a cleave window for Frost, and like I already talked about, the triple modifiers for Unholy are going to make both your burst in this window overwhelming, but also just the damage dealt by Abomination Limb overwhelming, which is an unbelievably well-focused change, like I said, because now your Covenant, your Conduits as they upgrade, they're all extremely impactful. Now you really want to get Brutal Grasp maxed out, and you really want to get the double legendary for A-Bomb's Frenzy, and this is just a direct buff. You get this right off the bat. So all those things are going to combine together, and of course they still matter for Frost as well. Like I was talking about, A-Bomb Limb does do a lot of damage, and Frost potencies are really bad. So we're going to run Brutal Grasp as Frost. And we're going to benefit from this damage buff, from this conduit buff, and from this legendary buff, just like Unholy does, because, like I said, strength modifiers increase the damage of Brutal Grasp, just like mastery modifiers do. It's not going to be as much, but it's still going to be very impactful. And Frost generates more value from this change, the 20% increased damage instead of 10%, because it has more on-demand damage from big Obliterate hits during Obliteration, during Pillar. That's a no-brainer. That plus the tier set bonuses, which we're going to get to, make a really, really high impact button press for Frost, and I'm getting excited just thinking about it, and which we're going to get to. So, but let's just do a recap here. Remember, in a new patch, Conduits, 282 item level or something close to that. Those are going to go way up. The legendaries, you get to wear 2, one of them has to be your Covenant legendary. And of course, just any scaling from secondary stats. Those things were all going to be poor for DK until they buffed all of Unholy's Conduits, which is huge, and then gave them both, Frost and Unholy, a massive cleave-centric conduit buff to Brutal Grasp. Then buffed Abomination's Frenzy to be a much better legendary, and coupled with either Frenzied Monstrosity for Unholy or Absolute Zero for Frost, that is a nuclear wasteland of damage that's going to occur when you add the tier sets in as well. So that's the summary. These new 9.2 borrowed power upgrades, whatever you want to call them, are going to be much better for DK now than they were going to be, and that's huge. But when you pair that with the tier set bonuses, which they also changed, remember, if you follow me on Twitter, which almost nobody does, I don't recommend it, you would see that I was complaining heavily about Unholy's tier set bonuses because they were terrible and clunky and they only mattered in the execute phase. They changed those. They also tried to change Frost, and I have another tab up here on my my Chrome browser here that's going to show that. They tried to change Frost, but apparently they couldn't get it to work, and now they're trying to. If they can get it to work, then they're going to release it that way. Otherwise, they're going to stick with this. I think that's insanely bizarre, but apparently it was harder to code than expected. Regardless, I'll get to that tab in a second, but first we're going to talk about Unholy. So, every 5 Clawing Shadows or Scourge Strike, of course, because one replaces the other, cast Soul Reaper on your target and summons an Army of the Dead ghoul. That's a great change. It used to be if... there used to be some secondary effect triggering that did that synergy with that if it procced the Soul Reaper, it's the secondary effect, right? Which means they have to be in execute range, which is really hard in PvP because people's health bar is slingshotting so much. That's why Soul Reaper isn't that impactful anyway. Right now, what the set bonus does is focus on giving you value and then giving you additional value in the execute phase, which is better. So what's going to happen is you're going to get a little bit of damage from Soul Reaper. You're going to get an Army of the Dead ghoul, and this is going to increase your sustained damage. But if you happen to get an execute proc with this, it's going to be nuclear damage, and you're going to get another effect. The minions dealing 5% increased damage is added to the 4 set. Like I said, I was complaining about that, so I don't know what changed their mind. It could be a whole host of reasons, but I'm glad that they ended up going in this way where there is an effect that's valuable in the 4 set that just gets increased if they're in execute range. So dealing 5% increased damage all the time, that's awesome. It's just way more output, especially since you're going to be summoning more Army of the Dead ghouls. So you're going to have more minions to deal 5% more damage. But if they are in Soul Reaper range, not only are you going to get that big nuclear hit, scaling with Unholy's Mastery, fantastic. You're also going to get even more finishing power because now your pet bonus damage is going to be increased by a ton. That's 20% more damage on top of like modifiers like the A-Bomb Limb modifier that is 20% more damage, and of course all of your offensive cooldowns, and of course however much mastery we'll get at that time. And this is just going to all compound to be unbelievable execute pressure, which is something that Unholy has never had. This is one of the clunkiest executes, and it barely hits hard. We're talking execute, we're talking warrior execute. It hits for 45k. I don't think I've ever seen Soul Reaper hit for 45k, and God forbid if you can even get it off. It's harder to get off than execute, and it does 1/7 of the damage. This, though, when you combine all of these buffs and these tier sets, gives Unholy execute pressure, not just from Soul Reaper bursting, but all of the other effects that gives you. From the damage to the damage bonus, and of course coupling that with the other damage bonuses that Unholy is getting. So that is going to be probably the highest raw output in the game. It's between that and Demon Hunter right now. I can't imagine anything doing more raw damage than Unholy. As we know, that's not the end all. What you want to do is hit people for 48,001 global. You don't want to just do a lot of sources of damage. But when that damage becomes too overwhelming, it becomes impossible to deal with. Now, I talked about that in my 9.1 videos for Unholy, where I said, that's what it's going to do, and it's going to be great. I was almost right. The problem is DH did it instead. DH did exactly what I said Unholy was going to do. DH Boomy. Have you guys played into it yet? It is taking the ladder by storm as I say this right now. And why? Because it does a lot of damage and nobody can heal through it. That is why. It does so much relentless damage that no one could heal through it. That's what I said Unholy was going to be. They nerfed a couple things. It didn't quite scale well enough. They didn't do enough for it, but DH and Necro DH just is overwhelming. That is what I believe Unholy is going to be next season. It's going to be DH levels of absurdity, plus all of the extra bonus benefits of being a DK, like very difficult to peel, Def's Advance, yada yada. DH has the mobility, but it doesn't have CC prevention, so Unholy actually wins out there, despite DH obviously being much more mobile class. So that 4-set bonus is massive. Now remember, I was complaining about it before, but when you change it and then also give them all of this, and it happens to work very well with the buffs you're giving here and just provide a torrent of pressure, I can change my mind, and I have. Now for the Frost one, this is actually also amazing. I would have way preferred the 2-set, but the 4-set is so good when coupled with the changes, like I keep talking about. It doesn't really matter to me. I hope they can fix the 2-set. Again, there's the tab. We'll talk about it in just a second. But let's talk about this right now. So consuming Killing Machine fires a Glacial Advance through your target, and that's a 4-set. Now that is incredible because every DK in PvP is going to run Obliteration. So we have the value. If Obliteration was bad in PvP and we had to use some other talent in that row, then this would be a non-factor. It'd be so stupid. But Obliteration is our go-to class-defining talent in PvP, and it is perfectly synergized with this because we know every single Obliterate during Pillar is going to consume Killing Machine if you're playing at a remotely competent level. Which means every single one of your Obliterates just got buffed in damage. That's all it is. Because the Glacial Advance, it applies Razor Ice. We might do some funky things with the Rune Forge. Of course, I'll get to that in my guides after some experimentation. But really, it effectively just adds damage to every Obliterate. So it could be effectively, Obliterate does 40% more damage. They just did it in an interesting way that might have some more synergies. It does have some little funky interactions here and there because it actually uses the spell Glacial Advance. Razor Ice is one of them, but there are others that I'm going to get to in my guide. No spoilers yet. But very interesting interactions there. But this is massive. And of course, it has incredible synergy. I mean, it's not hard to have synergy with increased damage, but when you add so much upfront damage to a spell and then buff damage by a raw amount during a window, that's a bigger upfront window. So you're doing 20% more damage from the Obliterate, and then 20% more damage from the Glacial Advice that's automatically fired. So sure, everything has synergy with damage buffs. It just buffs your damage. But when you're trying to get as much pressure in a very defined window, i.e. the window of Pillar Frost, however long that lasts, it is extremely good to have things that are guaranteed during that window. And this is guaranteed. Every single Obliterate is going to fire a Glacial Advance because everyone will consume Killing Machine. So Obliterate, plus all of the modifiers to Obliterate that we already know, plus the 20% A-Bomb Frenzy modifier, plus a Glacial Advance, plus the 20% Glacial Advance modifier. Of course, we're talking Razor Ice and Pillar as modifiers for this. And you've got a Templar's Verdict, finally. And we can fire them off a little faster than Rets can, especially with the haste buff during Empower, which is also going to get even higher from the Conduit changes. Wow, incredible. That's really, really good. The 2-set is super boring. It's 8% crit during Remorseless. It has negative synergy with Dead of Winter. It's really boring. Thankfully, the 4-set saves. The 4-set saves everything. But the 2-set is extremely boring. It's just crit chance. Yeah, you'll crit with Chill Streak and Rhyme procs more, and it's just terribly boring. But what they were going to make it is, if I recall perfectly, the 2-set was going to be building strength from spent Killing Machine procs, which would have even more synergy with Obliteration, which was going to be incredible. Apparently, there is something difficult. So they said the proposed bonus we talked about last time has proven to be a lot more difficult to implement than we'd hoped. Considering Frost has a functional and balanced 2-piece, it's been hard to prioritize solving it over focusing our efforts and dev time on more critical elements of the patch. I don't know what was difficult, but this is not time. They've done so many fantastic changes. It's not time to just bash. Maybe there's something very difficult about the coding of that. Why Killing Machine granting strength is difficult. I have no idea why. I don't remember if there were some other features of it, like maybe it was only during Pillar, or maybe it was only during a certain window. That said, that's what it was. They're trying to implement it. So if they do implement it, then we have an incredible 2-set and 4-set, and we are over the moon, because building strength during a window from Killing Machine procs is something that you're just, again, going to passively take use out of, because that's just what you're doing already every time you play DK right now. Every time you queue Frost DK, that's what you're doing. So nothing would change. You're just getting more damage from it. And that is unbelievable when you couple it with all of these other things. Another stacking strength buff, and you are just doing so much limitless burst damage, you're going to feel like a Ret Paladin. And that's what you need to be successful in this meta. You need to be a Ret Paladin or Ret Paladin-esque things. Arms Warrior comes to mind. So yeah, that we really want it to be in. If not, we're a little bummed by the 2 set, but the 4 set again saves it entirely, and that is the changes for DK coming in 9.2. A little winded. I generally I hammer things in, but you know, that's me. It's really just those changes, so it does seem like a lot of chatting for just these 3 changes, but they add so much power to our win conditions. I feel like they're worth it. And you're gonna know this. You don't even have to take my word for it. The second you put on A-Bomb's Frenzy plus your second legendary, Absolute Zero or Frenzy, depending on what spec you're playing, you grab the new Brutal Grasp, you level it to 282, you get this buff right when the patch release. There you go. A-Bomb Limb does even more damage. And then you grab this set bonus and you do your first, let's say your first Frost setup, where you press Empower, Pillar, you press all your offensive cooldowns if you have a badge and a Orc Racial, and then you spend that Rhyme proc. That Rhyme proc is going to generate an Obliterate that will now hit 20% harder because A-Bomb Limb is going. It will fire a Glacial Advance that will hit 20% harder. And it is going to possibly even start stacking up strength during Pillar and stacking up strength for a 2 set that I'm not sure if they'll be able to implement. And then by the end of it, you are going to continue doing that through the entire window. And by the end of it, you're going to be, I think, rocking out 35 and 40Ks. With all the strength buffs that you're getting from new gear and all of these things I just talked about, you could easily be doing 25, 30, 35Ks. With Arms Warrior Mastery, it could be obscene. Now, I don't know how much item level is going to go up, but so those numbers are pretty outlandish, but I guess, let's see. I've hit a 20k Obliterate without A-Bomb Limb being this. So add 20% to that, and you would have 24,000 as a max potential PvP obliteration. Then you would add a Glacial Advance. So I was counting that as the Obliterate damage. So that would be like another 9,000, 10,000. You hit 34,000, and then you need all the new gear and possibly the 2 sets. So yes, when you add in all of the things that will happen every time you press Obliterate, I could see you hitting 40,000 damage at global. Okay, and that's with everything maxed out, everything perfect, and you're playing with an Arms Warrior with Necro Banner. But you might be playing with an Arms Warrior with Necro Banner. So that is my thoughts. It's really, really impactful for both specs, as I talked about ad nauseum. Here's a big conclusion for me, and then I'll leave you guys alone. First, part 1 of my conclusion. Blizzard, all that I say here should not be used to go back on this and say, whoops, we jumped the gun. Wow, it's going to be way too powerful. It's going to be insane, because that's what happened in 9.1. And it turns out that optimism and excitement, oh my god, this is going to be so great, is what you need. If your class, it doesn't look like it's going to be so great, it's not even going to be close, because the other classes are going to be so great. In order to fit in with this meta, you need to be unbelievably powerful. So if somebody says, wow, these changes are going to make this unbelievably powerful, that's good. That means you balance properly, because everything else is unbelievably powerful. So you have to be that good to fit in. So this is not a cause for alarm that, oh my gosh, we jumped the shark. This is too much power for DK. We have to nerf every single one of these. Let's make it go down to 5% instead of 20%. That was too much. Don't do that. Because that will be another season of mediocrity, and this is the last season of Shadowlands, so that will effectively doom all DK players. Remember, DK is bad in 2s, good in 3s when everything else is quad S tier, and bad in PvE. So said my PvE friends. I'm not going to confirm that entirely because I don't play PvE, but I can assure you that it is bad in 2s, miserable in 2s, and not good enough in 3s. So if these changes are making it awesome, then I think you have to let them stay. At least, if anything, I don't know why this wasn't a feature in the past, but you can let the ladder develop and then do a hotfix 2 or 3 weeks in. I think that's how many development cycles have gone. I remember that multiple times in Legion. You can just tweak one of these things later. You don't have to tweak it prior to the season and go, oops, that was probably too much. Wow, DK sucks. Let's not fix it for 7 months. Anyway, part 1, High Blizzard. If anybody ever sees this, I love what you've done. Focus is perfect on all of the exact things that you would need to address concerning what you're actually doing with 9.2. Yes, I think it makes DK really good. Please don't worry. That's not a problem. I think that really good is just par for the course with what you've developed this season. I think if you add 16 more reallys, then you've got ret. Remember, really, 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 really good. Okay, right? So really good is fine. Second conclusion, this is for everybody else. I think you're going to love DK. This gives us a lot of options. Unholy already has a ton of options. We're not going to have any options with Legendary. You're going to run for Frost. You're going to run Absolute Zero and A-Bomb Limb. I guess you could try Coltiras and have the most unbelievably modified Obliterate of your life. But why would you do that when you have a longer A-Bomb Limb window? The AoE stun just adds that initial crank to it, and then you got Remorseless Winter Stun if you feel like using that, and effectively the cleave pressure is out of this world. So I would probably do that. You could also mess around with like the Remorseless Winter buff legendary, but again, I think those are all just fun little experimentations, and you'll always come back to Absolute Zero, which will now even hit a little harder with all these modifiers. Frostworm's Fury is actually going to hit kind of hard too, and it's not going to hit that hard, but it's a free ability that costs nothing and stuns them, so it's just a nice setup for any go. So yeah, you guys are going to have a lot of fun. There's going to be a lot of stuff to customize with. Outside of that, Unholy is going to have this whole universe of customization. I think Theory Crafters are going to be ecstatic. And I think Unholy players are going to be ecstatic because I think their class is going to finally be really good. Remember, I predicted that 9.1. They nerfed some things. Didn't live up to the hype, but what I predicted came true on a different class. Overwhelming damage does make for a good comp. It's called DH Boomy. And Unholy Boomy would not be that bad, or Unholy S-Priest for all the same reasons, when all of these changes come into play. So I know you're hurt, you guys are broken, you're like, how could I feel excitement and joy when I've been let down in the past? Try one more time. I think 9.2 is going to be really good. I hope you guys have a blast. I'm going to stop talking now. GG's, and I will see you guys very soon. Peace.